Brilliant. Let's get started. So hello everybody, and welcome to ECF's briefing with Councillor Jan Harwood on the topic of how local authorities are responding to the COVID-19 pandemic from a planning perspective. Thank you for coming, and I hope everyone is keeping well at the moment. I also hope you either have a beer or a glass of wine at hand, what I'm sure will be a lively session. If you don't, there is still time to go and get one. My name is Will Hamill, and I'm hosting this session on behalf of ECF. For those of you who don't know or are joining one of our events for the first time, ECF is a specialist communications engagement agency in the built environment. We deliver engagement campaigns for planning, infrastructure and built environment projects to help our clients add to the bucket of goodwill locally and work towards positive determinations on the schemes they work on. You can find out more about us at www.engagecf.co.uk. I'm delighted to be joined by Jan. As an introduction, Jan has served as a councillor in Guildford for Merrow Ward since the 2019 local elections, where the Liberal Democrats became the largest party after several years of, it's fair to say, Conservative majorities. And while the party fell slightly short of an overall majority, the Liberal Democrats have been in coalition since then with the Residents for Guildford and Villages Group, or R4GV. Jan was appointed to the council's executive in the aftermath of the elections, and has taken on the portfolio for planning policy since then, and now climate change after recent changes to the executive announced a couple of weeks ago. Jan has been at the forefront of bringing forward the council's closely watched local plan and is currently leading its second phase relating to development management policies, following the adoption of the first phase relating to strategy and sites in 2019, which is fair to say was very controversial. Jan, thank you very much for taking the time to join us. In terms of how this session will run, we'll begin with the keynote from Jan, just to give us a flavour of how the council is responding to the pandemic from a planning perspective and the latest on the local plan. I'll then pose a couple of questions before moving on to pre-submitted questions. And if we have time, I'll then open up to the floor. Ahead of that, please feel free to send any questions into the chat or raise your hand if you want to come onto the stage, so I can cover off your questions if we have time. And when doing so, please do mention who you are and where you are from. We'll wrap up a little bit earlier than planned, 10 to 8, just so we all have time to go outside and do the clap for carers. So without any further delay, I'll pass on over to Jan, who will deliver his keynote. Jan, thank you very much, and over to you.
Thanks, Will, and thanks for inviting me. It's always nice to have an opportunity to talk about Guildford. So a super quick bit of background on me. Where did I come from, and how did I end up with this hot potato passed to me as a first-time councillor and first-time executive member. I am a material scientist originally from Bristol. I was in academia for a while, and then I moved on to train as a patent attorney for a number of years before deciding that working for the super large tech giants wasn't really for me. I wanted to be one of the good guys for a change. So I joined the Liberal Democrats and I ran for councillor. And I sort of got thrown at the deep end. But my background is largely that I had 10 hours on average to study a new piece of technology and then make a legal argument about it. So they felt that if anyone was going to get to grips with planning and quickly, given how important the topic it was, that I was well suited to take that on. So here I am. About Guildford, well, it's a tricky place, a lot of opinions, and everyone tends to be, well, let's just say that no one's shy about expressing those opinions in a fairly loud way. But that's, I think, is a good thing. I think it's healthy for a democracy to be engaged with the system, and certainly there's no lack of opinions on the matters of planning. I'm reminded of a very influential book that I read, Black Swan by Nassim Taleb. It's about how you deal with the unpredictable stuff. And a lot of people will say that this COVID-19 crisis is entirely unpredictable and everything that's come out of it was unforeseen. But actually, I think there's a really good argument to make that a lot of the things I'm going to talk about today that makes it seem like Guildford was really well prepared it wasn't luck. We were looking to be more resilient moving into the future and preparing ourselves. So it's a very fine line between good luck and good preparation. So one of the key challenges to it obviously was how we deal with the local plan moving forward and generally with the way we handle planning applications. Fortunately for us, just before this crisis hit, we were undergoing some major changes internally through a program board called Future Guildford, where we are moving around some of the internal logistics and internal structures of the council to better prepare for the future challenges. And as part of that, we'd actually been handing out laptops to all our key staff, including planning, and putting in systems in place to have better software. And these upgrades were already in process when COVID-19 struck. So actually the transition to working from home has been incredibly successful. Now you might say, as I say, that could be considered luck, but I'm not saying we anticipated this, but we were certainly looking to bolster our systems. So largely speaking, our planning systems haven't really changed. In fact, if I can put some numbers on that, we've processed 141 applications in April this year, 2020, in comparison to 149 in April 2019. So there's, if you were looking just at stats, you might not even notice that there's been a major change in the working style. We have a very high delegation rate of about 97%. So business is as usual, really, in terms of determining applications. There's very little discernible change. The shift to the working from home style I think we operate a skeleton crew back at the main council. No more than 5 people are in the office at any given time. It seems to be adapted really well to the situation. I think the key concern and the key challenge really is about the well-being of the staff, some of who are very isolated. So in terms of the systems that are in place to support that, we're doing exceptionally well, I think. The one other key area, I guess, that was a real challenge right off the bat was the second part of the local plan we're trying to implement, which is the DPDs and the SPDs that we're trying to implement, which all have an evidence base and they need to be consulted on. So I guess the key area with that was we'd already, and we're again perhaps lucky in a way, that we already had the evidence base collected for a lot of those documentation. It was now about the consultation period. As many of you will know, there's the Reg 18 and the Reg 19 stages. And in a way, we're just carrying on because we've just updated our statement of community involvement. And you have to excuse me, constantly playing with my hair.
Don't worry.
I haven't had a haircut in quite some time.
No, of course.
It's not that I'm incredibly self-obsessed. So we updated our community statement of community involvement, which I believe we're one of the very first authorities in all of the UK to do so in line. Obviously, there's some issues on that later on down the road for us because Reg 19 still has legislative requirements for face-to-face interaction and paper-based copies we provided. But at the Reg 18 stage, we're now adapted, and hopefully the exec, I think, is seeing it next week to push that through. We can carry on with an online interaction for our a digital consultation, if you will, and I'll touch on that a little bit more in a second. So overall, in terms of the actual planning management, I think we've adapted incredibly well, and it's coincided with already bolstering of our capabilities internally. So that it's in a way it's a perfect storm that's worked out for us. The only thing that I think has to adapt quicker is the planning committee. And those of you who had the pleasure of watching it last night, a couple of things I think were very obvious, at the top of which is that there's some learning to do from a councillor perspective, I think it's fair to say. Well, on that note, I think it's incredibly disingenuous and unfair of me to complain too much as one of the younger members of the council and who's had extensive experience with digital media and various other things. One of my specialties in my patent days was software related. So this is I'm very comfortable, obviously, with digital technologies, and it's unfair of me to expect every other councillor to be at that level. But I thought actually overall it was incredibly well handled, and I think the technology held up very well. I think there's a little bit of logistics we can think about in the flow of the entire thing, and generally the way we maybe streamline some of the processes. Perhaps we do a vetting of speakers beforehand. I think there's little changes we can do. But overall, I would argue that the planning committee is very well suited to online meetings. I think it provides an extra layer of structure, which means that you're less likely to veer off course, which can only be a good thing in the planning process.
And what platform was that on? Was that, because I know one of your meetings
Microsoft Teams.
Oh, Microsoft Teams. Okay.
Yeah. So we're on Microsoft Teams, which is okay, and it's getting a lot of support. So there's constant updates, and I think that the software side is being adapted to the needs, which is good. And I would imagine that they've probably doubled their team working on that overnight.
Oh yeah, no, I'm sure.
Yeah. So overall, I think we're in a pretty good spot. I think planning committee is going to take a little to settle in, and we took a break. I think we held off on the March and April meetings just to buy ourselves a little time, take stock of the technology and plan how we were going to handle it. And I think that was a really good move. It's unsurprising. And I think last night taught us that you have perhaps streamline the process, because I think we only decided on 5 after the plan. So, you know, there's some learning to be done as people get more comfortable with the technology, but I think we're nearly there. So
do you think that will be here to stay moving forwards as a way of doing things, or?
I think there'll be some resistance to that.
Yeah.
I will be pushing for it to at least stay in as much as it can do. I think inevitably there is something that is lost without that face-to-face interaction, and there's a comfort level that having everyone there in the same room, and I think I felt it last night when perhaps we had less interaction between members than we otherwise might.
Yeah.
But that's not to say that once people get more comfortable with it, they wouldn't do it. But again, I think we have to be careful about this. And this ties in with the digital consultation. I think as a society, we're moving towards a much better technology integration in our lives. I mean, the classic example I always give is that my grandma uses WhatsApp more than me. I mean, you know, she's better at it than me. She's more aware of it than me. And my parents are on Instagram and all that, and their lives are constantly integrating with all the technology available. So I don't think it's as big a roadblock to as some people think. I think it's up to us as a council to make sure we build a platform that's capable of handling it, whether that's with the consultations or that's with the online meetings. I think it's on us. The emphasis should be on us, and the better we make it, I think the easier it'll be to convince people to carry on doing it.
For sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
Other than that, I think long term, it's going to be interesting time. I think what's definitely here to stay is the working from home element.
Okay.
I think you can have a very tough time convincing people to commute in when they've been proven by numbers sort of as just as efficient working from home as they have been coming into the office.
Absolutely.
And able to handle everything. So how are you going to convince people to fork out £3,000, £4,000 on train tickets, annual train tickets, you know, when the numbers are not there, you know? So I think that's going to stay. And I'm really supportive of that, actually. That's had a knock-on effect on my priority list for Guildford, which is, between us, high-speed internet infrastructure upgrades was always high on my list as a let's say, a millennial. But I think that's now on everyone's top priority. I think that's had knock-on effects on some of the prioritization and what infrastructure we need better. But it also changed the way we look at how we prioritize the infrastructure generally across the whole range of things, from transport to other things. All the things we said were impossible suddenly have been demonstrated to be very much possible. So I think we're in a period where we're going to have to be quite agile with our decision making.
Brilliant. Well, that's been very very insightful indeed. It sounds like you're holding up actually quite a lot better than some other local authorities. And obviously, said the preparation was key.
Is it luck or is it good preparation?
Exactly. No, that's been great to see. Let's go straight into some questions. I mean, you obviously mentioned the the next phase of the local plan, and obviously residents will get a chance to share their views on that. And I was watching one of the full council meetings the other day, where there was one mention of the first aspect of the plan that received, like in the region, I think it was 80,000 contributions under the Conservative administration. And I think that there is a perception in some parts of Guildford that a lot of that was ignored, a lot of the feedback. And there was a suggestion in the meeting of having a working group to take into account feedback a bit more effectively this time. So my question is, what can people do to get involved in this second phase of the plan meaningfully, and how will the feedback they provide influence the policies and the plan under this new administration?
Good question. First of all, I think there is a general feeling that the first phase of the local plan, the sites and allocation, the allocation of sites part of the document, was pushed through without any regard to the feedback. And as much as I would love to bash the Tories on this point, it's simply not true. The key thing we have to keep in mind in Guildford is that we're 90% greenbelt. 90% of the entire borough is greenbelt. And then we also have on top of that the AOMB. We have special designated areas of cultural heritage. it's a total minefield. So there was no scenario in which a viable plan was going to go through without some incursions into the green belt. The argument really that was happening is where that should be. And unsurprisingly, those who lost out feel a bit miffed off about that. And I understand that. But I think the issue is with, and this is a very dangerous topic, obviously, as you can appreciate. My personal feelings on the green belt are fairly well documented.
Yes,
and I've never been shy about talking about the issues there. I think when you're only working with 10% of the entire borough, you're inevitably making decisions that are the best of the bad bunch. If we had more options, we'd make better decisions. That's always been my argument. However, we are where we are, and it's been held up in court past the legal challenges. So our priority is now to work with that. And we intend to go through the process as we've always done, which is to ensure the policies we're putting into the development management side of things are of the highest standard. And we welcome a huge amount of feedback. But if anyone's been paying attention to sort of what councillors from across the whole political range have been saying, they should notice that everyone's fairly impressed with the quality of the second part, the LPDMP DPD, which I believe these acronyms are absolutely killing me. By the way. I spent the last year just the local plan development management document, the DPD, is sort of adds the flesh to the framework, and I'm hoping that the consultation on that will invite a lot less comments, a lot less angry comments. First, generally a lot less controversial comments, because we're not talking about where to build, we're talking about the high standards we're experiencing. And in all honesty, I think we've pushed a boat out, and I'm expecting a little bit of pushback from when it does go to an inspector, because I think we've been very ambitious with some of our standards. Now, I think you have to hedge that against actually allowing development to go ahead. I want everyone to know that I'm incredibly pro-development, and I think it gets a bad rep in Guildford. There's this feeling that development is a dirty word, whereas I see it as an opportunity to manage growth. That's what I look at it as. How can we grow Guildford in a healthy, sustainable manner, whether that's the industry or the population or just generally our conveniences and infrastructure. So I think the best way to engage with it is to give your honest view online in this first phase, and then obviously in the second phase, if there is some legislative changes, then we might do that also in a digital format. And on our end, I will make sure, to the best of our abilities, that we provide the format to make that easy for you. Now, I don't know if you saw from the last meeting, there was a comment about, well, a single text box is not good enough. What they didn't mention is that there was the exact opposite comment as well. There's too many choices. I only want, so there's almost a digital design aspect of the whole thing, which is the good UIs and good digital design can help it go a long way in making people feel that their views have been coming across. So that's what we're going to work on. We're going to try and make that across. And I think a working group will be useful. You always have to be careful in political scenarios like this, not to create a working group just to grandstand and just make a lot of noise. So what I'll be looking is probably creating a group to focus on the delivery, not on what's actually being said. Focus on, are we engaging with everyone we want to engage? The full range, not those who just have the most to say, but also the full spectrum of engagement, which in all honesty, historically has been, I think, left behind, mainly because it takes an exponential amount of effort to engage with that extra layer of people.
Absolutely.
And I'm not going to point fingers, but some people have taken the approach that's not worth it. And I don't think that's the Liberal Democrat or R4GB way. So I think we avoid falling into that trap. That was a very long answer to
No, it's great. I mean, I think it aligns with sort of the impression that I'm getting, that I think for people, there's sort of a growing sense now that even if you oppose the first phase quite strongly,
get on board,
that you want to make the best of it. So that obviously things go the best they can moving forwards. So thank you very much for that answer. A second question I've got is, we've been following very closely the recent changes to the executive, and in particular, the new collaborative approach between the Liberal Democrats and R4GB, with the executive positions and sort of split down the middle, 50-50. And obviously the R4GB will then take over overall leadership, I understand, later on in the year, for 2 years. And I think it swaps back to the Liberal Democrats a year before the local elections. So my question from this, in this context is, can we expect any sort of fundamental priorities when it comes to housing and planning objectives sort of shifting over these various milestones and swaps as we move towards the the next set of local elections, or do you think there'll be sort of, you're on the same page and there'll be sort of a continuation of objectives moving forward?
That's a great question, and it's very difficult for me to give an answer that will stand the test of time in many ways. But I'll give it a go, which is that I think we're very closely aligned, actually. I always considered one of the greatest strengths of the Liberal Democrats tends to be cooperation. Now, some people might disagree, but I think actually Liberal Democrats do very well when we work together with other parties. Yeah. That's not to say that we couldn't handle it, but it's actually forging cooperation and compromising and moving forward in a way that appeals to the broadest range of possible is kind of our MO. That's kind of what the Liberal Democrats are about. We don't like pitching our tent in one extreme or the other and then fighting to the death over it. Yeah. So working with R4GV was a very natural, I think, progression for us. And I was heavily involved in that as the chief negotiator from the Liberal Democrat side. Yeah. I think we are closely aligned, and I think we're going to focus quite a lot on the town centre. There is a very strong feeling from R4GV that the town centre has been neglected, and I can see there is merit to that argument, and I think it does need a little bit more love and attention. But I think what it's missing is a long-term strategic direction. It's very easy when you work in 4 or 5 year cycles to focus on the short term, and of all the activities of the council, the planning is the one area where if you're not thinking in 15, 20 year terms, you can't actually get a lot done. So it's at odds with the political cycle in a way, which is why I think we see such dramatic changes in council makeup over, I think, undeniably planning related hot topics. Yeah. So I think that long-term strategy and long-term vision is going to be important for Guildford. And I'm very supportive of working on that. And I think we have our own slight variations in perhaps what we emphasize within that work program. But largely speaking, I think we're marching in the same direction, which I think is ultimately the reason why we're able to work together.
Absolutely.
So I'm expecting almost no discernible difference in the output of the council between leadership changes in various cycles, hopefully.
Well, that's good. That's actually very good. Obviously, I know you said your answer, depends.
Remind me in a year. Let's see where we're at then.
Yeah, but I think that's very comforting for a lot of people. So that's fantastic. Thank you. And then the final question from me before we move on to others is, when we asked people to sign up to this event, we asked whether people thought that the pandemic would, what impact that would have on the council's ability to meet its housing targets. And of those who responded, I think 31% said it would have a negative impact and make it harder. 25% said no, and 44% said they weren't sure. What's your take?
I think a large amount is out of my hands. We've spent a lot of money dealing with this crisis, and we've sort of plugged the gap that county council really ought to have filled in. And that I don't think now is the time to start pointing fingers about where things have gone wrong. I think there's going to come a time where we're going to look back and analyse it, and it's going to become very apparent who stepped up and who didn't. But I can tell you now that the local boroughs across Surrey have really stepped up. And I'm not sure that we're going to get the reimbursement that we need to cover those costs. So that's going to put a huge financial strain. And that inevitably impacts all sorts of decision-making across the board. Suddenly, where I might have been a bit more hardball on a negotiation about some affordable houses here, suddenly I desperately need that to go ahead. I've got a softer position, and that's an impact. So I'm not going to sit here and pretend that it's not going to have an impact.
Yeah.
However, I think at the same time, with any economic downturn, sort of a standard operating procedure tends to be an injection into infrastructure spending. That's pretty predictable sort of attempt by central government to bounce back at least some economic activity. So I'm now going as fast as I can to start baking schemes, or should I say, preparing schemes ready to go in the oven, so I can wave it around and say, throw some money at this. Prime example being, for example, internet infrastructure. Wouldn't it be great if we upgraded it across all of Surrey? Because whilst we do very well in Guildford Town Centre, there are entire parts of the borough that are essentially dark, still on copper or other ways. So there's planning matters and planning infrastructure related things that we can pull in, and I think we are going to see some interest. Ultimately, the cycle of development is bigger than the downturns. I think, as far as I know, major developers, and they'll be able to tell us better, that they factor this in. economic downturns aren't exactly surprises. They're cyclical. And if anyone who's studied the economics can tell you that they're actually fairly predictable in a way.
Yeah.
And you land bank here and you pull a project here and you shuffle it around. I'm hoping that by having a pro-development attitude in Guildford and making the planning process as predictable as possible, and people always are surprised when I say that. My main concern, I always say, isn't to make planning easy, it's to make planning predictable. There's a big difference between the two things. I want developers to know when they approach us with ticking the right boxes in terms of environmental sustainability, the housing mix, or affordability, then they're going to get the permission. That makes it easy because that means less cost faffing around with 10 iterations and dropping money on PR to just try and get the inch of community acceptance. And more, we can get on with actually putting in good schemes. So I want planning to be predictable, and I want planning to be encouraged in Guildford to help us not only recover, but come out the other end of this, growing at a sustainable and healthy way. So that's again, a long answer.
No, but very helpful. And I mean, I'm actually, I live in Epsom, and I used to live in Elmbridge. So I'm particularly interested in what you were saying there about the infrastructure. Have you had to work more closely with like the other local authorities in Surrey as a result of the pandemic, or?
Well, I wouldn't want to give anything away, but let's just say that there is some healthy communication happening now, which is about, maybe it's time we look at this 3-tier system and maybe start cutting out some of the dead wood in the middle. Yeah. Interpret that how you will.
No, that's great. That's very good. Thank you, Jan. Okay, look, let's move on to some of the pre-submitted questions. So the first one I've got here is from Charlie Collins at Savills. This is his question. Council resourcing was tight anyway and may become more constrained post-COVID-19. Given the growth ambitions of the local plan, what is the council doing to increase resourcing in the planning department or finding new ways of working?
Tricky question in the sense that, yes, it was tight before, and it's certainly not improved post-COVID world. And we're not even in the post-COVID world, we're still in the height of it, sort of, in a way. The answer is that it's our priority, and it will get funding based on that priority. So my new portfolio is not just planning policy, but also the climate change. And that's not a portfolio that's ever existed up to this moment. So I actually started with 0 officer support, and now we're getting a new member of staff and a focus on this. So it's about shifting the conversation towards, well, okay, but here's our priority, which means that goes to the top of the list in terms of prioritization. And I think it's going to be absolutely essential to keep the housing delivery rate high wherever possible, and also to make sure that the planning process is not unduly arduous or convoluted or slow. And I think we do actually very well. Our processing rates are incredibly high, both on major and minor applications. And I'm very proud of the team in that. And I'm hoping to keep the numbers. And additionally, even our appeal numbers are really good. I think we've only lost 5 out of 35 since January.
Yeah.
So I want to keep making good decisions, and I want to do it in a timely manner. So any attempt to reduce my workforce on my portfolio is going to be met with a huge amount of resistance, shall we say.
I'm sure. Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Jan. Okay, second question from David Parry. Creators Communications. It's a rival of ours, but a bit of healthy competition is okay.
Sure.
So here we go. As the current pandemic will likely affect many people's ability to purchase a home, will Guildford Borough Council place a greater emphasis on build-to-rent accommodation outside of the town centre?
Yes, I was already doing that before the COVID. To be honest with you, I think we're stuck in a loop in Guildford. The land value is so incredibly high, and build costs are still fairly high. And if there's an economic downturn, obviously the whole process gets depressed. So you kind of get stuck in the loop where you never seem to break out of the cycle. As soon as we say we're going to get in on a project, the land value, the hope value goes up, and it just endlessly ran around. And it's sort of a chicken and egg problem that I've been mulling over for quite some time. And I think that the only real answer is a sort of a return back slightly to something that's fallen out of fashion, which is building to rent. And securing funding for that was once easy, but then fell out of fashion for whatever reason it might have been.
Yeah.
So if anyone wants to come and talk to me about things like essential worker homes, I encourage them to pick up the phone and call me right away, because I think out of all the cases I've seen across the country in terms of local authorities and their financial situations, Guildford's in an incredibly fortunate position. Our finances are incredibly healthy comparatively, and we have a good asset base and we own a lot of land, which says to me, perhaps it's time to risk a little bit and borrow a little bit if necessary, and let's try and fight this endless cycle of pricing out the next generation. Because as much as I'm here to represent those who voted for me, I also have to keep in mind the next generation that comes after and the future Guildfordians who have to live in this borough and work in this borough. And if we can't provide a place for those people, we're gonna get a brain drain, and it's already happening. One of the biggest things I hear about is the science park, for example, in Onslow Way. They can't retain staff because none of their staff can afford to actually live in Guildford, and none of them want to commute in because they're actually, if they wanted to commute, they just go and live in London and get a higher paid job anyway. So what's the point? Yeah. So it's very frustrating. I think we need to be a little more willing to take on risk to tackle some of these big projects and take on. I think SARP is a great example of where we're doing just that, and I'm very supportive and it's going very well. I'm really happy about that. And the money that's come in, the LEP funding and various other funding sources is really been very helpful in that. But I think we're going to have to get a little creative going forward in how we put together projects. Personally, whilst I understand where the whole affordable homes figure comes and why it's built into the local plan and all the various aspects of it, 80% of market value isn't really affordable in Guildford. I'll tell you that as a, a person who recently bought a house in Guildford. That wouldn't have, that wasn't what allowed me to get there. So I think we need to reevaluate the way we approach the problem. There are two things on my mind, which is how do I avoid right to buy, because I can't lose stock that quickly. It just defeats the purpose, and the maths falls apart. And people who don't know me, I like maths a lot. So for me, it's all about the maths. And the second aspect is how do I build in quantity that it needs to be volume. It's all very well building 2 or 3 affordable homes because I own a little plot and I get in on the action. But actually, that's not going to solve the bigger problem. So those are the two things I'm looking to tackle.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, Jan. That's great. Look, I guess we're going to open up to the floor now. So if anyone's got any questions, I think put your hand up now. I know my colleague Ollie is he's had his hand up for a long time, so I'll put him on now. Bring him up to the stage.
Sure.
You make me sound very desperate, Will. Just sitting here for half an hour.
Sorry,
Jan. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. Oliver Deep from ECF, one of Will's less esteemed colleagues. I'm going to be one of those awful people that prefaces the question with a bit of spiel. I was actually at the University of Surrey for 4 years, so I lived in Guildford for 4 years and absolutely loved the place. But my real confession is that I actually worked for probably 3 years for the Guildford Labour Party, which was something of a thankless task, I must say.
We've all had a Labour phase. It happens to everyone.
I may or may not still be in mine.
All right.
And I remember sort of hauling myself down to Westborough and Stoke Ward, trying to, it really was a thankless task, I have to say, at that time. But I believe that Angela Gunning still might be a councillor in Guildford.
She is indeed.
It's good to hear, and she was certainly a stalwart back then, and continues to
remains so.
I'm sure, absolutely. My question really focuses on Guildford High Street, because I heard your comments earlier about the High Street being somewhat, or the town centre more widely being somewhat neglected. Do you think that the pandemic has sort of precipitated the death of the sort of town centre and not necessarily Guildford High Street, but high streets across the country? And in response to that, are the council willing to listen to ideas about increasing residential densifications in and around the town centre, as well as other potential uses, even at the ground floor level?
Okay, so firstly, I very much know the pain of trudging up and down Westborough and Stoke. I was actually Zoe Franklin's campaign manager for the general election, so
okay.
I've done my fair bit of trouncing around Guildford. It's a challenge, especially on a rainy day.
I'll tell you this. In 2010, we had a candidate called Tim Shan standing for the Labour Party, and we all celebrated riotously when he kept his deposit when we secured 5.01% of the vote.
Guildford's always been a bit rough on Labour. I don't think Labour have ever held Guildford in the history of Guildford, so it's a little tough. I feel for you. Look, people have been saying that this is the death of the high street for the last 10, 15 years, quite honestly. Is this the final nail in the coffin? I genuinely don't know. I think that there are serious repercussions to the drastic non-existent footfall we've experienced. And I think a lot of businesses that were tethered, hanging on by a nail, are going to be knocked over by this. So I'm certainly expecting a drastic change in the landscape. When I say there's been a lack of attention, what I really mean is I think is everyone's been talking about the death of the high street, but no one's been doing anything about it. There's not actually been a pivot or a solution proposed. For me, I'm not saying I have a solution or I know exactly what needs to happen, but I do know that there needs to be some sort of an adaptation to the change in circumstances. Now, for me, that there's lots of options, and I don't subscribe to any particular one with great enthusiasm, because I'm actually open to more organic change. Whether that means Guildford shifts to a much more entertainment oriented town centre offering, or a more of a high-end shop, which I'm a little hesitant about. I'm not sure that's going to have much legs either, to be honest with you. Or whether it's more of a nightlife scene. I don't have a strong preference on that, but what I think we need to be doing is preparing the policy and the planning considerations and the master planning to allow that change to happen as in when it becomes available. So the classic example is we have a lot of shops that are empty, and I'm expecting a lot more shops to be empty after all this. So what can we do as a local council, and in all honesty, that we are severely limited in this regard by some of the things that are tied to counter councils' areas of influence. What can we do to enable a more agile environment for businesses? Tying it back to planning in a way, it's very often in planning committees that there is a real anti-business sentiment that creeps in. And councillors love to jump in on that. I suspect because a neighbourhood of 50 people has 50 votes, and that one business owner has one vote. It's common sense to side with one side over the other. But what we have to remember is that we have to nurture the businesses. Classic example last night about a business owner wanting to put 6 more skylights in his building to allow more light into the office space, and it caused an uproar. We spent 40 minutes arguing over it, and I'm thinking, hold on, these are people we want to be desperately supporting and holding on to, and the planning process should help these people to get what they need to allow their businesses to flourish. I see it as a sort of a drastic relook at the whole thing in a way. Let's try something different, because I promise you, doing the same thing that's been happening for the last 20 years certainly isn't going to save the high street. That's my spiel on that.
I think, and that sounds like it would be music to the ears of anybody that's looking to invest in the long term in the town centre and the high street. And Will, forgive me for overindulging, but on the university, even back when I was in Guildford 10, 15 years ago, the university was constantly having battles with the local community about various different issues. And
nothing's changed.
Indeed, and it looks like the new sort of battleground, if you like, is over the university's various different strategic land propositions, as well as plans to deliver student accommodation down in the town centre. I just wondered what your advice would be to the university to basically sort out its image problem, and what can the council do to proactively support the delivery of that tenure of property, because it is going to be increasingly important. When I was in Guildford, I lived in a couple of HMOs, and I know that stock particularly is under strain in the local area. So we need student accommodation. How can the council support the university and providers in doing it?
So I think the only group of people that get it worse than the business owners are the students, and student accommodation is a straight ticket to a real hot debate at the planning committee. Look, again, it's from my perspective, there's the obvious planning considerations about, you know, HMOs and what it means to the town and the way that the density and the change in demographic that students bring and all these details. But there's, I think that sits atop of that is a much more important point, which is that I want those students to stay in Guildford. I want those new ideas and new technologies that the university brings to stay in Guildford. I don't want students in Guildford to say, oh, Guildford town, terrible night out, not much fun. I can't rent anywhere because it's too expensive. I'm going to do my study and then I'm going to go. Tell you what, I'll go to London, which is the classic thing that happens at every university and everywhere. What I want the students to say is, I had the best time, the time of my life. I'm not leaving Guildford. I'm staying here. You know that new startup I'm going to do? I'm going to do it right here in Guildford. Oh, there's a nice shared workspace I can start out with. So I want to support that. And then I want them to say, this is a great place. I can afford it. I can live here, and it's got a good vibe to it. So we need to be nurturing that in any way possible. And I think it's very easy to not emphasize that as politicians, because guess what? Students don't vote. If they voted, someone would care for them. But the fact is that they don't vote. So it's very easy as a council, and you need to look at the demographic of the council to understand you're not going to get a lot of support on some of these things I'm saying, unless perhaps you're a little closer to the age. That's a bit unfair. I appreciate that, but they're not here to defend themselves, so I'm going to get away with it. So how can we help? Well, I think that the key aspect is to work together with the university, and I've got a great relationship with the university. I nearly did a PhD here at Surrey. I ended up going down the politics route in the end. But I know them well, and I want, let me rephrase. There are three great institutions in Guildford. There's the hospital, there's the university, and then there's the council. I think I want to see decision-making always joined up with those two other entities. If the council is making a decision without consulting the hospital and the university, something's gone wrong. Because I can think of almost nothing that this council can decide that doesn't impact the university and the hospital in some way, and how that those two institutions can't incorporate their strategy, from whether it's climate change oriented to planning strategy to, I mean, you know, to what we can do with our waste collection and the smart ways in which we can handle recycling, whatever. Almost any topic you can think of is better served with a bit of connected thinking. And that's, I think, and we've gone rather neatly full circle about why I think the Lib Dems and the collaboration works, is that this is kind of our forte. Instead of running the council as some sort of political oligarchy, not pointing fingers again about who that might be a reference to, I think that there's an opportunity to bring everyone on board and harness the various strengths that we have around us and put that into a strategy. And development management and planning is, I think, one of the very tips of that spear going forward and handling that.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
You got two questions out of one there. Was he allowed to do that? I don't know.
Oh, do you know what? He waited a long time. We'll let you off, Ollie. We'll let you off. Thanks for that, Jan. I guess, okay, like final question. How well do you think the government has performed in the context of the pandemic? Has the executive been able to receive the funding it's needed? And how has your role been directly impacted by their decision making?
Well, okay, that's not a very fair question to ask a Liberal Democrat, but I will give the most honest answer I can give, which is that I think it would have been tough for any government to handle this, in all honesty. I think the way that they've handled it has been confused. I think the messaging has been all over the place. And if we cast our mind to the original strategy, which is that it'll be okay, everyone will get it, and then most of us will be fine, I think was so far off mark.
Yeah.
It caused huge confusion and panic on the ground for us as a local borough, and the logistics we were told. So I think that was a great issue. The second issue was that a lot of the time we were finding out what we had to do through an announcement saying we were already doing it. And we were going, right, okay, so this is what we're supposed to be doing then. And that, I think, was very frustrating. Having said that, it's a learning process. I hope people learn something from this. There's a lot of areas that I think could have been handled much better. And perhaps, it's very easy to say that though, you know, it's...
Yeah.
It's not necessarily a fair remark in many ways. Is that retrospectively looking back and pointing out all the flaws is very easy. but I do think there were some fundamental mistakes in the handling. I think I'm happy to go on record and say I think Surrey County Council's handling of this has been pretty abysmal. And I'm very happy to say on record that I think as an institution, they need to be abolished as soon as possible. And we need to move to a unitary authority at the earliest convenience. And I've just lost a lot of friends very quickly, having just said that. That's just a reality. And I think that the local communities and the step up from the local boroughs has been fantastic and very impressive. And I think the community can feel that.
Yeah.
So there's that. How does it impact me directly? Well, I was for a very short period, for deputy leader, though it's been unceremoniously ripped from me to hand over to our dear friends. At the end of my time as a councillor, I'll do a little memoir of how it all went down. But let's leave it at that.
Lovely.
It's for me. I've always been juggling two things. I wish I had more time just to focus on the planning side of things, because there's enough there for a full-time gig. But as my other duties have been handling some of the political aspects of decision making that goes on. So it has taken a lot out of otherwise a fairly full agenda for me and my portfolio. We've lost some capacity to reprioritization of staff who suddenly had to deal with other things like dealing with phone calls to vulnerable or various other things. So there's been some logistical movement within. So it's had an impact across the whole range of activity.
Yeah.
But I don't think that would be obvious looking from the outside. Based on the stats I gave to you earlier, you wouldn't notice. So I think the handling has been impressive. That's a lot of hard work and dedication. From a personal perspective, I'm actually newlywed. I celebrated my first year anniversary last Monday.
Oh, congratulations.
So I've seen a lot more of my wife, which is lovely. She now might hate me, but I don't know. It's certainly get to see each other a lot more, which is great.
Yeah.
I'm a bit cooped up, but I'm okay. I'm of a generation which has always been quite comfortable staring at a screen, so it hasn't been too bad for me, I guess. But other than that, I think generally speaking, we're handling it the best we can, and I suspect when this is all over and we look back, Surrey will be demonstrably ahead of the curve in its response.
Well, Jan, I think that, thank you for that answer. Actually, I think that's actually a good way to leave things. I think that's the general message I get anyway, doing the best you can. So that's great. And Jan, thank you very much for your very informative answers, taking the time to be here. As everyone else for coming along, and I know the weather's so lovely today, so fair play. I'd like to thank my colleagues Ollie and Debbie who helped me organise this session. Thanks everyone, have a great evening, enjoy what's left of the sunshine, and cheers, I'll see you soon. Thank you.